You're watching PEGRI TV, Rhode Island's public access channel.
The wheel is turning and you can't slow down. You can't let go and you can't hold on. You can't go back.
Hello, welcome back into my wheelhouse. Anything is possible.
Wow!
Red Sox.
I guess we bring KG back into it, huh?
That's right.
It was awesome.
Halloween
I mean, me and Sloan are
episode.
big baseball fans, so
Yes.
it was
Before we get
Final
into
town.
the ton of
What?
things that we're going
Yes.
to talk about in the NBA, you two, what are
What?
your most happy looking back, fawn over the Red Sox, our world champion Boston Red Sox?
I would
Give you a couple
say-
minutes. You can lose your
okay.
mind. about
Good.
the Red Sox.
I would
Go.
say, well, there's so much you can say, but I would say there's 4 players that go down in Boston history after what happened with the Red Sox. And one of them was Jackie Bradley Jr., who 4 times in late innings.
That's your costume. That's who you're supposed to be.
That's my costume, that Jackie Bradley. Another one is another guy from South Carolina, Steve Pierce, who wins the MVP in the next one, and he drives in 7 runs in 3 at-bats.
Never heard
the
of him
third
before,
one
2 years
is
ago.
Nathan Eovaldi, who was, I mean, he was just inspirational for
Drove
his team.
people to
They
tears.
actually lose in 18 innings and bounce back right away. His own teammates were crying at his performance. 6 straight times, he goes out 7 times. Bottom of the ninth, it's a situation, tie scored. This is the toughest position you can be in as a pitcher. He does it 6 times in a row and brings his team to another at bat. Inspirational. And then the 4th one's a guy I don't like, but David Price was
Price.
awesome. On short rest, he won the big games. He's still digging at the reporters. He says, I hold all the aces now. How do you guys feel to the reporters? You know, you held all the aces for long
Vindicated.
enough. So those would be my biggest
It
memories.
was a really likable team. I mean, obviously we've seen 4 in what now, less than 20
2004.
years.
Yeah.
4 since 2004, and this is one of the more likable teams that we've seen. And seeing the contributions from the role players and seeing them all sort of just work together and really enjoy each other's company and enjoy winning together. It was a fun one to watch, and really proud of this team.
Yeah,
It's good to be able to say as a fan that you're proud.
They won 108 regular season games. Then they go 11-3, and they win all 3 series on the road. They go 7-1 on the road. They beat the Yankees in Yankee Stadium. Houston, who was defending champions, won 103 games. They beat them, and then the Dodgers for the 2nd straight year they're in the World Series. It was quite a performance. I think, without question, Sloan, would you say the greatest Red Sox team in history?
No, because I still think
Really?
I still think 2004 would wipe the floor with this team. I think
108
I think
wins.
overall the Major League is a weaker product than in
But the
2004.
Yankees and the Astros certainly weren't.
The
big
Yankees in
teams.
2004 were a better team than the Yankees
Okay.
this year. So I mean, I don't like to do that. Are they the best team ever?
Yeah.
Because then you always end
I
up
think they've earned
you
it.
always end up kind of insulting the team that just won. So I don't like to
baseball
compare.
a sport where it's more comparable across eras, though, because there's less variation in terms of rules and statistic
There were
variation?
more teams that lost 120 or more games this year than ever before.
Okay.
So there was much less parity in the league, especially in the American League. So I just think they were going against inferior product. That's
interesting.
why they
I thought
won.
that would be pretty defensive.
why
I thought
they won
everybody would go with
108.
that.
You think it's the best Red Sox team ever, for sure.
I think it is.
Yeah.
I think
Sloan
it's. I would debate with you.
Well, you had Schilling, Pedro Martinez,
I
Derek
know,
Lowe, and then of course you had Manny Ramirez and David Ortiz. That's a pretty good nucleus.
It is, and I when Omar Garcia-Pierre got traded, I didn't watch baseball for 5 years.
That's when I
And-
stopped watching baseball
Yeah.
altogether.
So during that period of time, they win in 2001. So I did not follow that team, and I can't tell you that for sure. But I think the 108 wins and the 11-3 in the playoffs. I was thinking, who would you say the best Celtics team is of all time? Probably the '86 Celtics. Yeah. And
Yeah.
the best Patriots team, I was thinking it's Randy Moss, but you really can't say that year they won the beat because they didn't win the Super Bowl. So.
It's tough.
So now you start talking about this team being the greatest team in Boston sports history.
Yeah, Patriots would say
And I know you're not going to give that to them.
I'd say
but-
Patriots would say 2003 just because their defense and offense were so good. But.
All right, let's get to the wheel. We got a ton of
Yes,
stuff to talk
yes.
about.
Thanks, Jay.
Title
I'm-
town.
Thank you.
I don't pretend to know a lot about baseball or the Red Sox. Obviously, we're very grateful to be as
We got a parade.
be as incredible of a sports city as we are. So
JBJ.
good job, Sox. Let's hope for
awesome.
more titles from other sports.
What a
moving forward.
manager. We got Stevens and we got
Cora, good
Belichick
job,
and now we got Cora.
Yes.
Yeah, he's the man.
Embarrassment of riches in Boston.
He's the man.
All right, so let's
Talk
talk
about
about some
coaches.
coaching changes. I wanted to frame it originally before it was either early today or late yesterday's news of Ty Lue being firing, I wanted to frame it as who would be the first coach to get fired.
Can we just say,
And
ha ha?
yes, I mean, I when I was writing down my list, I had Ty Lue second on the list, so he was an obvious candidate to get fired to begin with. But now moving forward, we can speak on Ty Lue in general and whether his firing was justifiable from the 0-6 Cleveland Cavaliers. And moving forward after that, which coach do you think is most likely to be kicked to the curb with their current
I bet you were
struggling
unanimous
team?
on that.
All right, so let's focus on Ty Lue to begin
Okay.
with. Ty Lue, championship coach. He's the only coach in Cleveland Cavalier history to be a championship coach. Obviously, a lot of that is to do with LeBron James and not with Ty Lue.
Yes.
And I think it's all pretty commonly understood that Ty Lue is perennially, when he was a head coach, among the bottom 5 or 6 coaches in the entire NBA in terms of his reputability in terms of play calling and in terms of out of timeouts and in terms of adjustments in game, in terms of his rotations overall. He was brought in when Blatt left the scene. He was brought in as a coach to manage egos, manage personalities, and be
Well,
a
he
player's
wasn't brought in either.
well, be a player's coach. I know what you mean, but
Yeah.
but
Well,
he
he's
was
an
brought
assistant
in,
coach
yes,
that was
he
in the right place at the right time.
Yes, exactly. So he was brought in, and whether he did that or not, I don't think so. It was just because of LeBron that they did that good. So
Yes.
justifiably so, and I think it was kind of a mutual decision. I think of it less as
Yeah.
a firing and more of a mutual decision to have Ty Lue be relieved of having to coach. We saw the end of the season last year. He struggled with anxiety that was affecting him physically. It even bled into the beginning of this year where he had struggles walking because of how physically detrimental his anxiety was to his back and to other issues with his body. So I think it was probably what Ty Lue wanted, was probably to get fired. He's getting paid. He has a guaranteed
And I think-
contract.
I
I think he liked that fact that he's out of there.
I think they delay firing people
Yes,
when
yes.
mental health and other sort of issues seep in
Yes.
because they feel bad and it's a bad PR thing. The same thing kind of happened with Hugh Jackson in Cleveland with the Browns
Yes.
because he got fired today too.
Hugh and Lue.
Apparently it's
Hugh
like
and Lue.
Hugh and Lue,
I think,
both fired in Cleveland the same
What
day.
I
It's
feel
crazy.
bad about is I think it all points that Ty Lue was in over his head.
Yes, way over his head.
And that you got to feel bad about. The poor guy. I mean, you hope he's okay,
Right.
and you hope he survives this because it's not like he's got a lot of confidence right now in himself or in his ability to coach. And I hope he gets an assistant job somewhere.
I think that's his correct place in
Yeah.
the league is as an assistant, and I think that's where his ceiling as a coach is. I think
he's not somebody you throw knives at.
Exactly. I think that I think he'll probably take a little bit of time off to himself to rejuvenate in terms of his health overall, in terms of what was actually listed out in terms of why the firing actually happened. In this 0-6 just putrid start for the Cleveland Cavaliers, where they witnessed losses to some miserable teams, including a blowout loss to the Atlanta Hawks, where Trae Young lost his mind. There was a disparaging thought process between Ty Lue and Kobe Altman in terms of who should be getting minutes on the team. Ty Lue went directly against Kobe Altman in terms of playing the young guys, including Nance, Chetty Osman, and Colin Sexton more minutes in favor of playing his veterans that he's comfortable with in J.R. Smith, in Kyle Korver, in George Hill. And there was a clear clash there. It was mandated from the front office that we need to be getting these young guys more minutes in the rotation. And in the very first practice, we saw, or apparently the rumors are, is that Ty Lue had his guys, the veterans, playing in the practice as the first rotation rather than other guys. And overall, that just continued to wedge a bigger split in the system for why he eventually got turned out. But I think it's all agreed that he wasn't necessarily deserving of a head coaching position to begin with. And the Cavaliers, what they do moving forward, they're probably better off for it. So before we talk about what coach might be fired next, what coaches do you think would slot in and that could align properly with the goals of a clearly now tanking Cleveland Cavaliers, especially coming out with the recent news with Kevin Love, who's suffering with toe discomfort that is alleviated to the degree of a legitimate injury.
Well, he's got quite a list.
He's now going to miss up to a month with this injury. So this team is tanking. This team wants to empower Colin Sexton, who's been rocky so far, and they want to empower the younger players that they are trying to entrust with bigger roles. So what coach that's available? We've heard of the Van Gundys. Now both are out of coaching job. They're available. Mark Jackson, other commentators. some other young people looking to prove themselves, including Jerry Stackhouse.
Yep.
We have the Spurs the Spurs assistants,
Messina.
Messina and Becky Hammond. We have former head coaches and current assistant
Vogel.
coaches, Frank Vogel, Mike Brown.
Jay Larinaga.
Yeah, Monty Williams, exactly.
Monty
And
Williams.
then maybe
It's quite a
even,
list.
and maybe even they could permeate into the college ranks. We've heard Shaka Smart's name, we've heard Jay
Yep.
Wright's name, and we've even heard
Tony
Tony
Bennett.
Bennett's name as
Yep.
well. But my pick is a very convoluted choice. My pick for the head coach of the Cleveland Cavaliers is Rick Pitino. I want Rick Pitino in as the
He's
head
on my
coach.
list, but
I want him in.
He's on my
I want
list. And I
him
was
in.
talking about him today, and I got him there, but he's not with. I don't have a match with Cleveland. You'll be
want him
very
in.
surprised who I got a match with, and we can talk about that later.
Okay,
but
who's your choice?
I don't think he works with Cleveland. I think you stick with Larry Drew, because if they're tanking and you're going to give it, why would you want to? Why would you want to give Van Gundy or any of these guys or Messina, who I think with the coaching tree of Pop, and he's won 4 European championships, he's probably a legitimate choice, but not this year, not now. I think they go with Drew.
But the problem is, and this has been announced up to an hour ago. They said Larry Drew, even though he was announced the interim head coach, he said,
really.
"I am not the interim head coach."
He doesn't want to be.
And
the
he
coach,
said,
right?
"I'm the voice of the people." But I guess he wanted like a long-term extension if they were going to name him
Let
the
him
coach
rest.
at
He's-
all.
right.
So they probably should have talked to him before they made that announcement.
Right.
But typical Cleveland Cavaliers.
I guess Stackhouse would take it.
So that's
maybe.
that's what's interesting about this Cleveland situation. In contrast to the multitude of
Everybody wants
openings and coaching and head coaching options, and we saw this offseason, we saw big market teams like the Knicks. And we saw situations with already a playoff roster in place with a
Bucks.
superstar player with the Bucks and with the Raptors. And we
Yep.
saw situations where there's young players where you're going to have a freedom to really mold an offense into what you want in teams like Phoenix. So there was lots of teams that had already just a high level of interest for any coach that was looking, whether they're an assistant, whether they're a former coach, whether they're a college coach, no matter what it is, there was high level of interest. But what's different with the Cleveland Cavaliers is I can't see 80% of those names that we listed wanting to even coach this team. Obviously, coaching an NBA team is a privilege. There's only 30 people in the entire world that do it. But this team is a struggling team, a tanking team that doesn't have much promise in terms of future reputability in terms of their assets. Yes, Colin Sexton has showed promise. Yes, they have other young, interesting players. But they're a team that is perennially run miserably by one of the commonly most agreed upon worst owners in the league, and Dan Gilbert, who always fires head coaches and never re-ups his GMs. He has 5 coaches in the last 7 years.
So I got a question to Shay. How in the world do you think that Rick Pitino and
He's
his,
in.
and his ego
So the reason
fits with an owner like that?
That's why.
I mean, no,
It's the
most
old-
owners aren't going to want
that's
him.
why.
It's the old, it couldn't get worse.
His ego
theory.
does not plug
the
into.
reason why it aligns is they need a candidate that is desperate and
Okay.
that also is headline grabbing. So I think that Rick Pitino, he
Yeah.
came out. He recently
good point.
he recently
He
hired
has
hired an
an
agent.
agent.
Yes, he hired an agent. He wants to get back into it.
Yup.
He did an interview with Adrian Wojnarowski of ESPN, and he talked about his goals coming into for what scenario he's looking to be the head coach of, and he emphasized
Player development.
player development, and that was just over and over and over again. That was his thing, and motivating a winning culture out of the players that are there and developing those players into winners. And I think that is the right thought process to land you a job like the Cleveland Cavaliers.
I've known that guy.
He's desperate.
Since he's 25
He's
years
desperate.
old. And that ego goes nowhere.
Yes.
I mean, that ego is there for life. And no matter what he says, it's a better. So I think he's going to have the right ownership to blend with him. Nobody's going to give him the keys like Boston did again.
No,
and
absolutely
and
not.
he failed at New
That's
York.
what the problem
But
is.
if you want to, I would go to wait for a need of change before I would throw him where I think he's a good match.
Okay, then let's
So we
let's
can move
jump.
on, and
Let's-
maybe I'll
no,
get him
well,
or not. But I would
let's-
like to tie Pitino
We're
into
still
a job.
we're still talking about the coaches. Let's just talk. What's your next coach to get fired? So now it's not Ty
Okay,
Lue.
I guess I can do it
Ty
right with
Lue
that.
still wasn't my number one coach. My number one coach to get
It's
fired.
Billy
Donovan.
Donovan.
Billy Donovan. Fire him.
We could have 3 of us.
I
could
think
have
we've
said
been saying that for 2 years.
Yes.
Everybody except me, and I agree, but I'm starting to see it because when I see this offense now, I say, Carmelo's out of there, it's still like that. Durant, it was there. I mean, the offense is still stagnant. It still stands still. It still doesn't move.
He has no
After
grasp.
timeouts, he's got, I mean, look what he did against the Celtics. That shot by Westbrook, how could a coach let anybody take that shot?
Right.
They can't shoot from 3.
And you have to agree that maybe
so-
there are shortcomings in terms of what his effect on the team is, in terms of telling or trying to negotiate a certain play to happen, and then having Westbrook saying, no, I'm going to do this instead. But at the same time, that's still a pitfall of a coach. If you can't motivate your players to follow you, that's your fault. You need to be able to employ your players to trust you and to know that you're putting the right play that's going to allow you to succeed in place. No one on that roster trusts Billy Donovan. His play calls and his ability to motivate a team with a correct rotation is awful. He needs to be out of there. This team is struggling. They barely squeaked out a win, and they are one of the biggest teams that needs a change, and the change needs to be him.
So it all connects. It connects with underperforming as far as what's happening there.
Right.
But Donovan, I guess the way I liked him from Florida, but I guess that's a recruiting situation, and he's a good recruiter. And he had Horford, and he had Corey Brewer, and he had Noah down there. And that's what he does, but I thought he was smart enough and he had enough of a Patino background that he knew his X's and O's and that he was strong, but that's not playing out. And I thought this team would be much better with Carmelo out of there and then not looking that way.
I think it's obvious to throw among the hot seat contenders Thibodeau, of course, because of all the melee that's happened there, and he really hasn't taken control at all.
No,
and of course, anybody that's a coach for a struggling LeBron team could be on the hot seat, but it seems like Luke Walton and LeBron have a pretty good relationship so far, so that might be okay. But I'm looking over in Washington at Scott Brooks.
Yeah, he should be on the hot
seat. And I'm wondering, do they ever know what their identity is under Scott Brooks? Because I don't think they do, and I don't think it's working. Whatever they're doing isn't working.
The storylines came out today that he actually isn't on the hot seat, even though I agree he should be. And when you look up and down the coaches, a lot of them are either coaches with new roles, coaches with established roles, or coaches that just will have the freedom to mess up a little bit. So there really are only 4 or 5 names that are going to be on hot seats. One of them was Ty Lue, and he's out. And the other ones are Donovan. Brooks should be one. Tibbs obviously is one. But then after you get by that, you're looking at coaches that reputation are poor and may align with a coach that should be on a hot sheet, like J.B. Bickerstaff, but he just got signed to a longer-term deal with the Memphis Grizzlies. True. So you're not going to have a lot of coaches that are on the hot seat. So really we're looking at Billy Donovan and Tibbs for probably the 2 most likely coaches to get fired, even if Brooks should be higher than those guys. But let's get to it.
Yeah, get underperforming or in need of a change, because I really want to talk some more Patino. I love Patino. I mean,
have you listened to Eddie? No, you don't listen to the podcast. Okay, overperforming teams. I asked you to pick 3 teams that you see that are overperforming at this point in the year. My 3 teams are the Detroit Pistons, the Memphis Grizzlies, and the Los Angeles Clippers. Did you guys have any of those 3 teams?
Yeah, I definitely had Detroit until you saw them against Boston. You were really excited about them, but I think Sacramento's overperforming. I like the things that are happening there. To be 3-3 at this stage of the season, that's pretty good. And then I would have to say it's some of the better teams. I think Toronto's overperforming. Yes or no? The other thing, I think Milwaukee's probably performing to potential, but I think they're overperforming also. That they surpassed Philadelphia right now. Both those teams, Toronto and Milwaukee.
I would say that.
So they're overperforming.
From what we've seen so far, I think if I had to adjust my preseason predictions, I think I would drop Philly to the 4 slot and move Milwaukee up to the 3 slot. I still have Toronto at 2, and what we've seen out of them is what we were thinking was going to be the best case scenario. It just came a lot quicker, and that did align with what we were expecting out of Kawhi Leonard, and we were assuming he might have a slower start in retaining and going back to his close to MVP self. Obviously, that came much quicker than we were expecting, so that's why they returned to dominance so early.
How can you even believe he was hurt last year when you're seeing him now? It's like, my God, he was so ready to play.
I think it's more on those teams, like saying that the Toronto Raptors and the Milwaukee Bucks are overperforming because they haven't lost yet. I feel like that might fall a little bit on deaf ears for me because they're not performing that much higher than how I think they're going to look when they look good.
Let me give you one that is, though, for sure. And probably my favorite team, I think the Nets are really overperforming.
Okay.
I mean, they played Golden State real strong. Yes. They played New Orleans real strong, lost on a very interesting game. They're very competitive, very fiery. They come to play. I continue to really like their coach. I think they're on the up.
Right.
And I know they might not win a lot of games, but I like what's going on there, and I like their tenacity.
I agree with you maybe in terms of their ability to stay in games might be considered overperforming. They are only 2-4, and that's because they have lost a couple
But
close
New Orleans
games.
on the buzzer virtually, well, it was a one-point game. And Golden State, they actually had Golden State, they played very strong against Golden
Well,
State.
if staying in games constitutes as overperforming, I would say two teams that I thought might be in the cellar but are performing pretty well are Dallas and Atlanta.
Yes.
They're staying in games as well, and they've been very watchable. They've been a great product as compared to last year when they were kind of unwatchable. And I agree with Memphis completely because I don't think anybody expected them to
They
come
don't
out of the
surprise me.
gate above 500.
So
but-
I think the reason that Detroit is so clearly the choice that in the poster child for
They
an
look so bad, and
overperforming
we're going to see
team
them again tonight.
is because they and their success has been dependent on a Blake Griffin outburst
Yeah.
that isn't likely to be sustainable throughout the season, whether due to health or whether due to
67% from the
Right,
three.
exactly.
and which it happened against my fantasy team,
right,
by
right.
the way.
So sorry for your loss.
Ugh.
But their tight and tight neck wins were against some really suspect teams. They struggled to play against Atlanta, and they struggled to play against Brooklyn. We saw Brooklyn almost took them down at the buzzer, and their wins are so iffy. They have a negative net rating through the first 5 games, even though that they're a 4-1 team.
Yeah.
They have a negative net rating through these first 5 games, and I think that more properly reflects the team that they are. I, in preseason projections, had them missing the playoffs at the 9 slot. Whether this start means that they're more likely to make the 8, maybe. I still think that they are a borderline 500 team, and I think that will balance itself out. It's interesting. You need to be able to quell what teams are doing in terms of performing in contrast to what their end of season outlook will be. We saw last year, we saw the Orlando Magic start 8-2, and you could just tell that wasn't sustainable throughout.
True.
But I think
Reggie Jackson's always going to be a problem with that team,
stinks.
and he's just not good
he
enough.
stinks.
He's just not good enough. That's the front line.
Talk about
Miami continues to play
overvaluing.
well.
They overvalue Reggie Jackson for
Just
sure.
spin away.
All right.
And the Boston Celtics.
Nothing wrong
So
with talking about the
after
Boston
an up and down 2-2 start, we have won back-to-back games against the Oklahoma City Thunder in dramatic fashion, with Marcus Morris's second buzzer beater in 2 years against this team.
Playing really well.
And then we followed that up
Continues to play
with
well.
an absolute thrashing against the Detroit Pistons, aforementioned Detroit Pistons. 2 nights ago, we had a 109-89 victory. So now we're 4-2. We're looking good. We have a kind of a tough stretch coming up.
On the road.
7 of our next 10 matchups are against playoff or supposed playoff teams, including Milwaukee, Denver, Indiana, Utah, Portland, and Toronto. So we're going to have a tough schedule. So we're going to, and a lot of them are on the road. It's going to be very interesting to see how we're going to carry throughout. What have you seen from this team? Just some background stats overall. We have a 5.3 net rating. That's 10th in the league, and that's really bolstered by our number 1 defense that's still there. We've seen a stagnant start on offense. It carries out in a 100.5 offensive rating, which is 28th in the league. So it's an interesting comparison to see how much stronger our defense is than our offense when basically we're on opposite sides of the barrel, and that nets out at 10. That's how much stronger our defense is performing than our offense. We're basically among league leaders in every single defensive metric possible. And we've shown some offensive promise. But what are you seeing from this team, and what do you look to see moving forward?
As always, I really pay attention to the Celtics. I'm really plugged into them. I think our wild card continues to be Brad Stevens and Danny Ainge. I mean, as long as we got those guys, I'm going to be saying I don't care how bad things look. I'm always going to feel all right. Well, the bench, obviously, I think you're wrong with Tice. I think Tice can play, and we've seen him all.
Before we get into this, we just got news that Tice fractured his foot, and he's out indefinitely.
God. Is that true?
Yeah.
Well, we had a Bob sighting.
Bob is
that was
incredible.
exciting. So we see him. I thought the best development in the last game was that Gordon Hayward looks like he's starting to turn the corner.
Yes.
And you saw a little more explosiveness. You saw a little more fluidity in his moves going to the basket. Everything seemed to be more in sync. I was getting a little worried in terms of how much they were saying his ankle was hurting after all the games and after every game, and that had to be a real burden for him. And I think it was actually in the games that you could see that. But that last game, it looks like he may be ready to turn the corner. The other thing I see is a difference in the way that Kyrie is playing. And, he didn't score last game, but they still had a real strong game. I think one thing that we said is I had him in the top 10 in the league. You guys had him that high, and we probably will refigure that quite a bit now after seeing what's going on. But I think it's all for the good. And I'm seeing Kyrie do things defensively that are really pretty exciting. He's really plugging in. He's not worried about not scoring. He's not worried about shooting bad. He wants to plug into this team. He wants this team is really deep. And the bench will continue to support whatever goes on with that front. One of the problems I see is I'm questioning Jaylen Brown in terms of his readiness for this year. I would have thought that he would have improved his shooting. And I also think he's regressed in terms of finishing at the rim. You look at him sometimes, and he's really sloppy at the rim. I think he's going to be fine. I love the team, and everything's good with it. But I think I don't know what he did in the offseason, but it certainly wasn't working on his foul shooting. His shot looked better last game. I also don't like that when Jaylen Brown says, what are your goals? My goals are to make this team as good as I can and get to be as high a position as I can in the players' union. That's not good. A guy that I don't want that to be his mindset. I don't want him plugged into Chris Paul type stuff. To put that aside. Don't even talk about that. I got two major goals.
Focus
One's
on
the
winning
team.
like Kyrie is.
What are your
like,
major outlooks so far?
I think they're scrappy. I think they go out and they all want to win. I don't think it's coming together as well as you'd like, but it's so early, and I think they can get by off of defensive team ball and intensity. It's not always a good product. I think sometimes they do end up doing a little too much ISO. And I don't think Brad wants to call a timeout every time they end up doing ISO ball, because I think he wants them to mature and progress as players individually as well. And I think he wants them to get it themselves. He doesn't want to hold their hands. But overall, I think we all expected it to be a little choppy, or bumpy out of the gate. I'm not worried about that.
I don't think I'm worried either. Obviously, our offense has been very stagnant to start, and I think that a lot of it is the players are still trying to figure one another out in terms of how their chemistry is going to flow perfectly. Gordon's progression in terms of how his game has looked offensively is, I think, a pretty perfect microcosm for the Celtics offense in general. You can tell when Gordon is in the flow and when his handle and flowing off a screen and pulling up into a jump shot or going to a pass, whether he has a thought in between each move and between each event, or whether it's just instantaneous and whether it goes. And I think that reflects really with the entire Celtics offense, where if we're starting in a pick and roll, if we're starting with a horn set where movement is predicated on a certain event to start, we're seeing too often we're seeing players be uncertain, or maybe even if they do or are aware of what their role is or what they need to be doing, uncertain on the timing of it and uncertain on the speed. And I think that the speed and timing is something that once it hits all at once and everything is flowing properly, we look really, really good. And I think we've had 2 games out of the 6 where we've seen strong play. And one obviously was in the Detroit game in the first half. And one, I think, was in the first half of the Toronto game as well. And in both of those games, I thought that we were moving the ball very, very well. And I thought that we were getting to our identity as a team that was stretching the floor up, in, and out. And we saw Al penetrating and kicking out. And we see penetrating on closeouts. And we're seeing the movement of ball. In this game against Detroit, there was 3 different times where we had 6 passes before there was 15 seconds left on the shot clock. And that's the type of ball movement that we need to see. And I think that's going to be reflected in a more appealing offense overall. And you say you're kind of questioning Jaylen, and it's interesting. So I have an interesting thought process.
Why isn't he shooting better?
It's because he's just having a slow start. So I have an interesting thought process in terms of player success and how that is reflected with team success. And when I think about there's kind of 2 different schools of thought and player groupings with the Celtics for me. So I put Marcus Morris, I put Jason Tatum, and I put Kyrie Irving in one player grouping. And I put players like Al Horford, I put players like Jaylen Brown, and I put players like Terry Rozier and Gordon Hayward in a different player grouping. And the way that I segment those two apart is when at their ceilings, these players are performing to their highest ability, which play style is the type of play style that the Celtics want to be having, where we're flowing, the gears are turning, and everything is looking perfect.
Okay.
I want the play style that is the Al, the Jalen, the Gordon Hayward, and the Terry Rozier over the play style that is the Kyrie, is the Tatum, and is the Marcus Morris. Not that we don't need that other side, because we do. And at points, countless points throughout the season, our offense is going to struggle, and our offense is going to be stagnant. And that's when we are going to need to lean on isolation creation from those three guys, on shot making and shot creation, because our offense can't do it through the movement and through the passing and through the empowerment of everyone in the offense. So that is necessary. But our ceiling as a team, and where we have the opportunity to really rocket into the just in terms of having the assets where we can be a top 5, top 10 offensive team in the league, that aligns more with Al, Jalen, and Gordon Hayward all firing on all cylinders as a team that stretches the floor with points at the hoop and shots, open shots at the three. And this team is moving the ball quickly, and they're fast, and they're running on the fast break, and they are moving the ball around the key. And I think that when I see, like in the Detroit game, I see Al catching, attacking a closeout, hitting Jalen up faking, driving in, finding Tatum in the corner for a three. I see Jalen driving on the fast break, Al filling the lane, weak side, and Kyrie floating to the corner, strong side for a three. I see that these guys, when they are working properly, and obviously we have had a slow start to Jalen, and I think that might reflect why our offense has had a slow start. Because what I'm seeing with the Boston Celtics is when Jalen is the perfect microcosm for our offense. I think when Jalen is playing well, I think we have a good offense. I don't think that that's true with Tatum. I don't think that that's true with Kyrie Irving. Those two players can get off, and we can still have a bad offense. Tatum can have an incredible offensive game. He can score 25, and we can have a terrible offense that game. And he'll carry us to a win because of that creation and because of that value that he offers. And that's why Morris is also necessary. And I'm beginning more and more to recognize that in games where we're struggling, we need that from Morris. And that's when I love Morris. But we still are struggling to fit it all together. And that's what we're seeing, and that's why we haven't been perfect so far.
So in your two baskets there of players, I think we all tend to look at the offense more than we should and not factor in the other factors of the game. And in that basket of Tatum and Morris, you have the two best rebounders on that team. And they both play strong defensively. We say Tatum's got stronger and bigger. He's able to play guys closer to the hoop. And Tatum's averaging 10 rebounds a game, and Morris is averaging 8 rebounds a game off the bench. No. And they are good rebounders. They are actively rebounding on defensive end. So I think you really...
Our rebounding is surprisingly pretty good so far through 6 games.
Yeah, but
and it is a lot because
go with your other basket, you're not getting too much rebounding from the other basket.
I'm not necessarily saying I want these guys playing and these guys not playing.
Yeah.
I'm just saying in terms of play style
overall.
I think it's interesting, obviously, offenses where we may be a little bit slow to start. But just to speak on the defense overall, I mean, you say that Morris and Tatum are two of our stronger defenders. I think that, I don't know if we have a best defender on the team. I think that our best quality is the versatility. In this game, we saw Jalen start the game on Blake Griffin, and that was a huge reason why this Detroit offense never got going. Jalen completely took him out of sorts. Blake had no clue how to deal with his quickness and his quick hands and his quick feet and his ability to deflect the ball and prevent Blake from getting the ball on the ground.
It actually got Jalen's offense going
because
he performed so well defensively.
Too. But Jalen wasn't on them the whole game. In the first quarter, Jalen, Marcus Morris, Tatum, and Marcus Smart all guarded Blake Griffin, all in the first quarter, 4 different guys. And then we saw the second quarter start, and we had Al Horford guarding Blake Griffin. Blake Griffin had no clue what to do. Blake Griffin had no clue what to do because at 6-minute mark in the second quarter, he had been guarded by 7 different guys in the Boston Celtics lineup, and every single one of them gave him a different look that was too much for him to handle.
It's like a video game where you're going against a powerhouse, but you have like 5 or 6 different players that you can plug in for different scenarios. It's a pretty awesome thing to know that you have that much depth defensively.
Really?
And that you still haven't hit your strides offensively. I mean, it's like a much better version of the Utah Jazz in my eyes.
Yeah.
Like like we're going to end up scoring probably about 15 points more a game than the Jazz.
I think we
All
got to still
said
be
and
going
done.
for the trifecta here, the 3 world championships at once. That should be so good.
Yes, I would like that.
One
I would
step
like
at a time, but I mean, I don't
Title
see why
town.
not. I love Stevens, and he's continuously looking at, he's just coaching right all the time.
I think that it's good. Something that
And traded Danny.
I want to talk a little bit about Tatum for a second because
Go ahead.
Tatum,
Oh, yeah.
even though he's incredible and he's a future All-Star probably this year, and he, I think, more often than other players on the team will probably be, if not Kyrie, will be the best player on this team. But his offensive mindset makes me nervous. And I think that Brad will be able to quell it when it comes down to it. But right now, too often, he is deferring immediately to this Mamba mentality that he has built up. And I think that is to the detriment of the offensive success. And this
Wow,
may
the Mamba mentality.
it kind of aligns with what I'm saying between these two pockets of play style. I think that Tatum too often is deferring to an isolation score early in the shot clock. And we see him getting the ball at the three-point wing extended, and there'll be 19 seconds left on the shot clock, and we'll see Gordon flash off a pin down, and we'll see Kyrie come and loop up and loop back down, players flashing to the ball with their hands ready, and we see Tatum just staring at his defender. And I think it's fine because Tatum can score on the defender more often than not, and Tatum is incredible. I just think that we need to pay attention to him because he might be depending on himself a little bit too much, and that may also be another reason why our offense has been stagnant so far because he is not allowing the offense to get into the necessary flow, and he's depending too much on
As
himself.
good as he
I
is
agree with that.
physically, and as talented as he is a very young player that's
He'll
definitely
learn.
got growth.
Yes.
And I think
That's
we
a
saw that with,
byproduct of last postseason, of course, because we needed him to be that player.
So-
but there are games where he's played 35 minutes this year and had 0 assists.
Right.
And that's not
we
even hockey assists.
Right, and we do need him. We need, like, for the exact every reason I've said, we need him to be able to contribute in that way. We need him to be able to do those things, but I don't think that it should be his first thought process and his first option. Too often we're seeing him, and that's the number one thing that he's going to go to is I'm going to stare you down, I'm going to beat you off the dribble, and I'm going to score, and I'm going to have blinders on. And that's fine if we're dwindling down in the shot clock or we're getting towards the end of a quarter or our offense messed up and botched and people ran into each other and the guy that was supposed to be open isn't open. That's fine, but I need to see less of that early in the shot clock.
And also, I mean, that sort of makes your offense predictable in
Yes,
so
it
many
does.
different
It does.
ways.
Well,
Because if
yeah.
he gets the ball with 12 seconds or less in the shot clock, then the defense can really not, they don't have to worry about focusing on those swing men like Gordon, like you were talking about. It's kind of like if you have James White and the Patriots and you're only handing off to them, well,
Yes, exactly.
eventually they're going to end up
need a
stacking
little
the
bit-
box.
you need to be
And
more
it's
dynamic.
consistent with how the whole team's played so far too.
Yes,
You've
yes.
got a lot of stagnation out there, and that's on Brad's shoulders to develop this. And we've talked about before, where they've got a lot there to manage, a lot to head forward, and a lot to make the best that it can be.
Yeah,
and I believe that it
and
will.
just to be clear, I'm not saying that Tatum and Morris and Kyrie can't fit in to that other pocket where we're a firing offensive powerhouse, top 5, top 10 offense, because they can. It's just that their styles don't match, and I think that we're going to get to the All-Star break, and I think that Jalen is still going to be an All-Star discussion because I think our offense is going to figure it out, and I think that's going to see a rise for a player like Jalen.
I'm not seeing enough consistency of him to be an All-Star.
Yeah,
There's
I
only
don't think
6
there's
games.
a chance.
I think he's an All-Star.
All right.
I know 6
Hope
games.
you're
He's
right.
had
Good
All right, big
spins.
3.
All right,
Yeah,
real
no
quick,
repeats.
real quick.
No repeats.
Good
Huh?
spins today.
Oh, look at you with your Post-its. Huh?
All right, I got
You a little
Post-its.
flip book.
All right, big 3. Players that won the MVP in years that Shaq won the championship.
Okay.
Because we know he got
Allen
kind of
Iverson.
overlooked. Allen Iverson, 2001.
Kobe.
No.
I'm just guessing.
Steve Nash.
Steve Nash in 2006.
Wow, you are good.
This guy's a beautiful mind. And the other one was in 2002. Any guesses, Uncle
Kevin
Mike?
Garnett.
I don't know.
Tim Duncan.
Duncan was
Duncan got one.
KG was 2000.
Deserved, but I think we all agree that Shaq was the most dominant in those years. But-
Just like LeBron.
Big 3, most wins, career wins as a head coach.
Like in
Well,
NBA
top
history.
three.
And we'll start in NBA history.
Lenny Wilkins.
Lenny Wilkins is number 2.
Jerry
Correct.
Sloan.
Jerry Sloan, my namesake, number 3.
Bill Fitch.
No. We're looking for number 1.
It's not Phil Jackson.
1200s.
Nelson.
Don Nelson.
Wow.
Boom time. All right, and the last one is this season, the big 3 in rebounds per game so far. I know it's early, but
What's the number one? Like 17 and a half?
yeah, it's
Well, I mean, which players are leading the league in rebounding?
Yes, through 6
Drummond.
games.
Andre Drummond, number 1.
Giannis Antetokounmpo.
Giannis is number 3.
Really? DeAndre Jordan.
DeAndre Jordan, number 2. All right, you guys
All
are
right.
good.
Spin it. That was a good
finish.
round.
Nice
Lots of
quick,
answers.
Nice quick big 3.
You split them.
That was like rapid
First one I
fire.
was worried. I didn't get much on the first one.
Let's
still
go to
underperforming.
All right, 3 underperforming teams where we talked about overperforming before. These are teams that record may not reflect how successful you think they
Ooh,
should
this
be or
one's-
will be.
This one's easy.
I have the Philadelphia 76ers
Yes,
as my
that's
first
what
team
I got
that
too.
are underperforming. I think that,
I really think they're underperforming.
and I think it has. I really think it has a lot to do with Markelle Fultz.
Wow, you've come full circle on that.
I still like Markelle Fultz, and I still think that they are doing probably the right thing with Markelle Fultz for the time being. I think that giving him this shot makes sense because in the ideal world
team.
where he pans out, they need him to be that third fiddle. But right now, he doesn't look like that, and that's okay because they're young and their timeline isn't to be a championship right now. And they're looking across the conference and they're seeing a powerhouse in Toronto. They're seeing an improved team in Milwaukee, and they obviously know that they can't mess around with the Boston Celtics.
And you got Indiana, too.
I think that they're aware that their timeline isn't the NBA Finals this year, and their timeline
Wow.
is further down the line, and that they should be paying more emphasis
Don't tell Joel Embiid that.
to Markelle Fultz's development. And
Oh.
obviously the right decision is to play J.J. Redick over him because their offense is eons above with J.J. Redick in with Markelle Fultz. But I think it's perfectly fine. And overall, I mean, Joel Embiid has been a superstar, and he's averaging 30 and like 13 so far. He's been nuclear. We've seen Ben Simmons kind of hampered a little bit by the lack of spacing of Markelle Fultz. He's forcing the ball a little bit more than he does usually because he has one less shooter on the floor, and it's hurting him.
Let's
This
continue
is
to talk about
Shane.
them because
Gone down,
that was definitely the team that I'm seeing.
They're 3
I
and 3.
did watch a full game this week, other than the Celtics and other than the Red Sox 5 nights, 6 games, including the 18-inning game. But it was a wonderful game. And it was Milwaukee and Philadelphia.
Yes,
that was a
good
really
game.
good
That was
game,
a
and you
good
got to see how good Milwaukee was. But you got to see how this Philadelphia team is underperforming. And I think that Brett Brown is a problem. I think Brett Brown is not. He's got them to where they are, and that's where I think Patino needs to be.
You want Patino in Philly?
Oh,
that's weird.
I think this team needs.
Brett has too
a
much power.
change.
Brett's not going
Yeah,
anywhere.
but I think they need a change, and I think he's got some
Patino,
problems on
Philly.
that. I'll tell you one thing that team is maybe near the bottom of the league, and I don't know what the stats. They are a bad passing team.
Yeah, it's just Ben Simmons.
They
and no one
are,
else passes.
they are a bad passing team.
they
They
are.
are constantly hitting you in the knees. They're off target with their passes. That game was atrocious in terms of the quality of fundamental passing. They need a coach in there that is going to bring this team along fundamentally. Redick needs to be playing all the time. Redick's a solid player.
Yeah.
Simmons should move to the 3, and he's got to learn how to shoot. You've got to take him off the point.
Well, it's okay. No,
He's a real good passer on the top, but he'll hit Embiid from the wing. He'll hit Embiid from the wing over the top.
does not need to move to the 3. Simmons should
I
stay at
think
the
he
1
does.
because he's a 6'10" dynamic superstar point guard. That is a top 5
Shay,
passer
we've got
in
to the
this
point
league.
where he is never going to be able to shoot, and Sloan agrees with me.
But-
he can't shoot.
But
It seems to be getting worse.
But even so, that shouldn't be that big of a problem if Markelle Fultz wasn't next to him. If we had J.J. Redick in the
Maybe.
starting lineup, we wouldn't be
Maybe.
saying anything negative about Ben
I
Simmons.
think if
It's
you-
only because of the lack of space.
I think
That's
they're-
why he's
He'll
struggling.
rebound, he'll pass to Embiid, he'll score inside, move him off the ball, give it to McConnell, and go from there.
I think they're forcing the issue with the Fultz thing, and I think it's affecting their overall dynamic. I think they could be contenders this year, but they're building off of the wrong things. They're looking in the wrong
They're
avenue.
not a solid team.
I think that they started incorrectly. I personally wouldn't have started Markelle Fultz, and I wouldn't have given him that much leeway and that much
J.J.
leash.
Redick's averaging 20 points
Yes,
a game.
I know he's great. I would have started J.J. Redick, and I would have
He's
allowed.
solid,
I
and
would
he
have allowed
passes the ball
I-
fundamentally.
I would stagnate. I would stagger Ben Simmons and Markelle Fultz, and I would bring Markelle Fultz in as soon as I brought Ben Simmons off the floor, and I would try to literally employ the same exact offense with just Markelle Fultz instead of Ben Simmons, and then allow him to feast on second rotations of the other teams, and Markelle Fultz hopefully would build up enough confidence in that manner, allowing him to really take advantage of backup point guards across the league, rather than struggling in a space really struggled, a space strangled situation in that starting lineup. Now that they made the decision, they have to stick with it, because it's going to hurt them even more if they take him out now.
Here's where I'm down on Brett Brown. How does Brett Brown see this as a big three? And he is adamant that this is a big three. Fultz, Embiid, and Simmons.
Because that's what it needs to be.
Ridiculous.
That's what it needs
That's
to be.
ridiculous to say that. And that's when he comes right out and says he's developing this big three. That is just not right.
Can you imagine Terry Rozier there?
Yes, he would be
That
fantastic.
would go very well.
With a new coach.
I think you're
with
both,
a new coach.
I think you're
Rick
both,
Pitino.
I think you're both thinking about how this team isn't going to reach its ceiling this year with Fultz, but I don't think that that's their outlook. Their outlook
They're
is
fundamentally not a strong team.
Yeah, not yet, because their third
coach
fiddle,
is gonna keep
their
them
third
there.
fiddle that they're hoping develops to be the number one prospect in the draft that they drafted him to be, hasn't reached his ceiling yet. Close to it.
Who cares? Like a good enough team without him.
I
agree,
think
but
his ceiling is
I
low.
I agree, but he's an asset that they should try to develop if they can. They know that their ceiling right now this year isn't a championship, isn't a finals
I don't
berth.
agree.
It's being competitive in a
They
playoff
took,
series
they
against
took
other
Boston to
four-strong
the
teams.
max. They were thinking
They took
finals
Boston to
last
the
year.
max with Tatum and Jaylen Brown as the best players. What do you mean?
Yep.
This team is good, and this team is going to be good for a very, very long time. And I think it makes sense for them to
They're
do
flawed.
their due diligence with
We
Markelle
didn't see
Fultz.
that. We didn't see him as
Yeah,
flawed.
I don't think they're even going to sniff the Eastern Conference Finals this year.
No, I mean, there's too many good teams ahead of them. It's
But
not, it's not because
but
they're
I
a
think
bad team.
sometimes a bust is a bust. I
don't
just
think he's a bust.
Fultz is a bust.
If Buttonholzer went to Philadelphia instead of Milwaukee, Philadelphia would be on the up right now. Absolutely, positively.
Yeah,
I don't know about
I
that.
think Brown's
because
done his job. He's done
Redick
his
is
job
top
there.
5 in three-pointers made right now. Who else shoots threes there? Budenholzer is more of a
Saric
run and
can
gun
shoot
and a
threes.
three-point
Saric
shooting.
has played really poorly so far.
Well, but he's a good player. He's a real good player.
Watered down.
And Saric is
Total
a strong enough
blooper
player
reel
that
right there. Lost both my
I'm not worried about
waters.
him having a couple bad games, and he can shoot the three.
Landry
McConnell
Shamet's
can
been
shoot the
bad.
three.
I mean, their depth overall is kind of weird because the players around their edges and the fringes haven't been performing as well. And then a large player with Wilson Chandler, who I think is going to help them a lot. The three, he hasn't been there. But move
I
on.
got bad teams too.
The other teams are obvious. The other teams are obvious.
Underrated. Who you got?
Rockets, Thunder, and
Yep.
Wizards.
Yes.
They're
For me,
the obvious
it's
ones.
3 playoff teams
They're the
that
obvious
are
ones.
just really underperforming
Is Harden hurt?
beyond our wildest dreams.
He missed the game.
He didn't play, yeah.
He missed the game.
Addition by subtraction with Carmelo.
Yeah, I didn't include.
Yeah, so Carmelo's in Houston, and now they stink. What's with Carmelo?
I didn't include OKC, Houston, or Washington in this grouping because I think what we're seeing from them is just kind of overall dysfunction and maybe expectations to begin with being a little bit too high. I think that Houston is struggling because their defense is legitimately a problem. Their defense is no longer switchable everywhere, which it formerly was very strong in that manner. They were a top 10 defense last year because the only problem that they had was Harden getting switched onto a dynamic ball handler. Every single other switch scenario was a benefit and was a strong scenario for Houston. Now, they don't have Mbamute, they don't have Ariza. People tried to overrate the loss of those guys, when in reality, that was huge. Now, they're playing in James Ennis, who hasn't been very good, and Carmelo Anthony, who's an absolute dumpster fire. And they're struggling for good reason. Their offense is still good in most cases because they still have 2 of the best pick-and-roll ball handlers of all time and matched with an awesome lob rim-running big and Clint Capella, but the other pieces don't make sense yet. And they're going to continue to struggle. They're still a great playoff team.
Can I just say that Daryl Morey is the most overrated GM in the league? Because they got Chris Paul pretty much because the players talk to each other. I heard an interview with him praising Carmelo and saying that he was a great pickup for them.
You gotta praise your own picks.
You got, but he was saying that he was going to be a go-to scorer for them. It's like, how lost are you if you think that he still has the ability to be even a top 4 player for you?
Okay, what about the other 2 teams?
Well, I think along the lines that we're talking right here, would you guys agree that the East is equal to the West right now? I think they are.
Just in terms of depth, not necessarily, because the depth on the
mean,
bottom.
the playoff teams, the 8 teams that are going to make the playoffs, I think the East is as strong as the West.
I mean, the second and third best teams in the league are in the East. The Toronto and Boston are the second and third best teams in the East. But it's when you get to the 6 through 10 in either conference, that's where the disparity is. And I think that still remains true. But with other teams that we're talking about, I think Washington is it's just more of the same. Like, are we doing this again with Washington? Why are we surprised that there's dysfunction? Why are we surprised that even though John Wall and Bradley Beal can get their stats and in a game can look not bad, that this team is struggling? I think it has a lot to do with their coaching, and I think it has a lot to do with the subsidiary pieces around those guys being bad. Otto Porter is extremely overrated. He's having a very, very tough start. He's on my who's not list for this thing. He's averaging only 9 points a game. He's only had the one game that they won was in a game that he performed well. So similar to what I'm saying with Jalen, when this team, the Washington Wizards, is performing well, often Otto's stats reflect it. So far, Otto's been terrible, and this team has been terrible because he's supposed to be this team's third best player. And then after that, you're looking at Austin Rivers and Jeff Green to try to get you wins.
It's like Jeff Green's like another Carmelo Anthony. Wherever he goes, it's going to be a problem.
Otto's
but
shooting
tell
like
me
28% from three.
I think John Wall and Beal get too much flack.
A guy with the skill set that John Wall has got, he seems to have everything that you would need to be. Why is that not working? Why is John Wall? Why do we talk about him in a negative sense? When he's so gifted, and
because his stature is lackadaisical, and even though his talent is top notch, his mentality in terms of his drive and his motivation,
I never saw that before last year.
And his motivation to be absolutely a menace isn't necessarily all the way there.
A hard player.
I think he gets too much slack. I think he gets too much hate and too much disdain to a team that doesn't have good pieces. And it's going to be interesting to see what happens when Dwight Howard comes back. And it's funny to say, but I think Dwight Howard is going to help this team.
Yes.
They need someone who can be a rebounder. They need someone who can be a lob threat. Markieff Morris is their best center right now.
It helps with spacing, too, because Wall is good at sort of spacing the floor and dropping those dimes to the big man. Like, he's said it about Gortat in the past, too, like how many open layups and open dunks did I get Gortat, who, as we're seeing on a different team, is not even good for 5 points a game.
I'll defend him a little bit because I'll say Gortat was a good teammate. And where I saw this team fall apart, is when, and I think we talked about it before last year, is when Wall got hurt.
Yeah.
And Beal stepped up.
Yeah.
Beal was the player. Now, when Wall came back, it has not worked since.
So in that stretch, when Beal stepped up, you know who else stepped up? Otto Porter. Otto Porter played great in that
Absolutely,
stretch.
but I mean, when Wall came back in,
I agree.
Because you got two heads there that aren't working together.
I remain with the thought process that these two guys aren't the problem. It's the
and I like
surrounding
Beal.
aspects.
I like
It's the
Beal a
surrounding
lot.
aspects. I think that John Wall, he gets a lot of hate because he isn't one to stray away from criticizing the people around him when they aren't performing to the ability that they should be. And he's right. He's just not necessarily being a great teammate for it. But I think it's okay. My other under team is Dallas. I really love what I'm seeing from DeAndre Jordan, Dennis Smith, and Luka Doncic. We've seen a team that's really fluctuated and hasn't been able to put it all together. They're still trying to figure out. Those three guys have great chemistry, and we can kind of blend together every conversation we have left, other than the Jimmy one. Just in terms of my who's hot aligns with my underperforming. Because I think that DeAndre Jordan has been phenomenal so far. DeAndre Jordan's averaging 15 and 15 with 3 assists. I spoke on it in the preseason in terms of me seeing him around the perimeter and the free throw line extended as a creator in this offense, as kind of a placeholder and a playmaker whose eyes were moving around the floor in a different manner than they were at any of his years with the Clippers. And we saw that he had 9 assists, a career high in a game where he almost had a triple-double.
Yeah,
it was last night, right?
Yeah, his defense is not at an all-time high because he was Defensive Player of the Year.
He should have went to Dallas the first time.
Years ago. He should have went to Dallas the first time, but he's been great. And the bigger surprise is he's shooting 88% from the free throw line. He's 26.
No kidding.
He's 26 for 30 on the year.
How does that happen?
He's completely changed it. It's funny though. His routine is different. So I went back and I watched some Clippers games. His routine is he's very focused. He stares at the ball a lot. He does some like fidgeting with the ball. It's not always the same thing. He goes and shoots it. Now he does it. He wipes it. He says something to one of his teammates every free throw. He says something. I don't know what he says. I don't know whether he says the same thing. He says something. It's always a question, and then he nods his head, and then he goes.
That is not going to make you a better free throw shooter. So
it's
there's
about
something
routine.
fundamentally
It's about
going on.
routine.
I want to know what's happening here because he was a drummer. He was a drummer.
He looks great.
He was under 50%, right?
Oh yeah, he was one of the worst.
So
free throw shooters
something's
ever.
happened there, coaching-wise. Somebody's got to his shot because something's changed. I'd want to hear that story.
I don't think that saying that he's going to saying that he's going to maintain where he's at is obviously a little bit blasphemous. But I think that it's very reasonable to say that he's probably going to shoot over 70% this year from the free throw line. That's really interesting.
A lot of it's probably confidence.
Yeah,
I think
a lot is
they've
confidence.
emboldened him.
Yes.
They've trusted him with a
looks
lot
great.
more, and I think he was probably happy with that.
Yes.
LA clipped his wings in a lot of
Yeah, they did.
ways,
Yeah.
and now he's one of the veterans now, and they're giving him a
Hey, other
bigger
guys that are
role.
hot.
Yeah, who's on your hot list?
How about Rudy Gobert?
Gobert has played well.
He's got high 20s a couple games. And
Isn't he-
LeVert, obviously LeVert.
love
Isn't
what I'm seeing
Gobert
from
like in the 70s and
And
field goal percentage?
but we all know the type of shot
But
to
he's
take. How about
shooting from
Nerlens
4
Noel?
feet.
No, had one big game
He
because
had 20 last game. He played very well against the Celtics.
He played okay in reserve minutes. I love him as a backup.
played very well
I will
against the
say,
Celtics.
Nerlens Noel, when I was looking at the
looks
advanced
bigger.
stats, his rebound percentages, they're
He's
right
good.
up there with the tops in the league.
That's definitely somebody who's stepped up.
He's a strong player to be off the bench for that OKC team, and we didn't touch on them for why they're underperforming. But the huge problem for them is they have no shooting. Their only shooter on their entire
they
roster
got
is Paul
really-
George and Alex
yeah,
Abrines,
when you get-
and they have too many defenders and too many
Schroeder can shoot a
They have
little
too
bit.
many.
Their coach.
They have too many one-sided players, and the coach isn't doing a good job at capitalizing. I have Dame as my who's hot guy.
Oh, God,
he's had
yeah.
back-to-back 40-point games. He's
Yeah.
nuclear. He's averaging near
He is.
35 a game.
There's
He's-
so many of the
he's
top
shooting-
10 players that are playing right at that level.
Steph Curry.
I don't
Oh, yeah,
I don't
of course,
think that,
KD,
right?
LeBron, they're all playing
all
great.
of those guys that we just said, Steph, KD, Dame, even
They're
LeBron to
playing
a degree,
awesome.
they're all
AD.
kind of near the 50, 40, 90 club. So we're seeing all-time efficiency with all-time offense, and it's really remarkable to see. What other guys?
Other
do you
guys,
guys
I think
have?
Whiteside, your guy that you picked
I
up,
like
he's played a lot.
Whiteside.
But
He's looked
I
good.
think Lowry
Has
with
really-
Kawhi
He's
is
benefited.
a different player than he
benefited.
was with DeRozan. And you
benefited
also
a
got to
lot.
say
Leading the
DeRozan.
league in assists.
You also say DeRozan's performing too.
DeRozan looks good.
And so that was a nice win-win for both those players, I think. But Lowry has really stepped up, I think.
I think that Lowry looks as good as he's ever looked in terms of his.
It looks like John Wall creating out there.
Yes, he does. His
John Wall should be
his
looking.
passing. It's so funny how much more space your offense gets when you remove a low efficiency mid-range plotter with DeMar DeRozan and insert a modern superstar with Kawhi Leonard, and how much better your offense looks and how much better a good point guard looks in that offense. Kyle Lowry pairs way better with Kawhi Leonard than he paired with DeMar DeRozan.
Ironically-
he's proving why he was the best player on that team last year, and he's pairing fantastically with him. I don't think that it's out of question for him to average a career high in his assists.
But I gotta say, ironically, DeMar DeRozan is fitting in pretty well with San
27 a
Antonio
Yeah, I
because
think Pop-
Popovich
it's 'cause
is
Pop knows
utilizing
how-
his
Pop-
role.
Pop knows how to
I
make
love
him.
the job
course.
Bud's doing with the Bucks.
Oh, he's doing incredible.
I mean, I love how Brogdon's playing. I love how DiVincenzo's playing.
Oh, White Dante.
He looks great. So they
like
have
that call.
and
My
the other
boy-
thing
my
that's
boy
working on that
Middleton-
team
Middleton.
is Giannis finally has a coach.
Yes.
And it's you're seeing that across. I think that team's a contender.
I think that they're a contender to make the finals. I
I think they're a
I
contender.
think that we need to consider them in the conversation with the Toronto and the Celtics. I think they
And,
have usurped.
Sloan's guy Middleton
Yes,
continues
they-
to be
they-
one of the
they-
best shooters in
third
the league.
most threes in
I
the
believe
league.
they have usurped Philadelphia in the pecking order of the East, and I think they aren't a team to be messed with because of the top-to-bottom talent. I think the contributions they've gotten from their subsidiary guys like a Dante DiVincenzo, who's been a surprise to me. I didn't think
Yeah,
he was going to come
he's great.
and do this.
Brogdon's played very well.
I kind of disagree. I do think that
Why?
the one area where I think there is a bit of stagnation in their offense and in their flow is with Brogdon. I
it's
think
only because Bledsoe keeps playing. I'll keep saying
but
that.
Bledsoe's playing well, isn't he? You don't
He
like
had
what you're
6
seeing from
points
Bledsoe?
last game.
Yeah, but his
and again, I'm a slave to the box score, but I did watch that game, and Brogdon played very well in that game
I'm
against
not trying to do
Philly.
too much,
I like
Bledsoe.
Yeah, I like their offense so much more when they have Dante DiVincenzo in the lineup
Yeah,
instead
but
of Brogdon.
DiVincenzo's not ready to be a starter in that
It's
league.
okay
And-
because he's
and
shooting-
Brogdon is a defender. Brogdon is a solid ball handler, a solid passer.
DiVincenzo's-
Makes all his foul shots. So does
DiVincenzo's-
DiVincenzo, but DiVincenzo's not ready to take Brogdon's role.
I just like the threat of him making a shot in terms of how it affects the spacing on that team.
He's perfect off the bench.
Okay, let's close out. We got a minute left to talk about Jimmy Butler and his continued just traumatic situation in Minnesota. Most recent scenario that we heard about is the Houston Rockets offering 4 first-round picks
Now,
for
why
Jimmy
is
Butler.
that so good? The Houston picks, they're going to be bad picks. Why is that so good? I
Because,
know I'm
because
wrong
what
on
else
this.
are they going to get for a guy that is going to
But
go
why
into
is
free
that so
agency
good?
the
It's
following
because
year
they're
anyway?
first-round picks and they're all the way until 2025.
So you're going to bank on them going bad?
You're going to bank on you're getting 4 first-round picks, and first-round picks
Yeah, but
are
late rounds are nothing.
Okay, tell that to Kyle Kuzma and Josh Hart. Tell that to
Oh, yeah, but you're rolling the
Cinderia
dice.
Stonewall.
I mean,
Tell that to and it's
I don't think it's out of the question asked by Eric Gordon. is what I'm saying. I don't think that's out of the question.
Oh, well, they said no.
They should get
They
it.
said no, and I think that's where the trade's going to lead. I think it's going to lead with
I'm
maybe.
I'm on Minnesota's side as far as what they're looking for.
But I think we can all agree that Minnesota has to get a deal done.
Yes, they need to
and
trade.
I think Minnesota it's rumored that they're leaking stuff
Yeah.
and making stuff up about re-engaging with Miami.
Bad.
And that's how desperate they
Sure.
are.
Pat
So
Riley
I
puts
think
that in his
Houston
spot.
holds the cards in this to begin with.
I think what you will see is maybe a third team gets involved. Houston probably takes one or two of the first-round picks that they offered off the board, but they include Eric Gordon, and then maybe a contract gets dumped in the process to a
But we
third
thought
team.
Miami was
So
going to work. Who's the next team?
I think Minnesota's probably going to get away with getting a player, getting a pick, and getting out of a contract, and that's what I think is going to happen for Jimmy Butler to be able to leave. But that's all the time that we have. We're going to do the games off camera. We haven't had
Yeah.
time to do games on screen.
Boston Red Sox.
Yeah,
we got
good
the
job,
Duck
Sox,
Boats on
championship.
Wednesday. It was really big.
Title town.
It was
Hopefully,
big.
hopefully
I'm
the Pats,
tired, but man, that was awesome.
hopefully the Pats and the Celtics can follow in their incredible winning lead. So we'll see what we got. Adios from the Wheelhouse.